for a second to go ahead. And I believe we're ready. So good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for our HRW CARES special COVID edition, right? We have here with us two doctors from the MetroHealth system, Dr. Maier and Dr. Williams. We also have our own Ward 6 Councilman, Councilman Blain Griffin here today. But before we begin tonight, I wanted to first just start by giving a warm Harvey Rice welcome to all of our presenters this evening. Thank you so much for taking some time away from your schedules to provide this very important information. I am confident that we will get to the bottom of facts over fear, right? And we will learn about this COVID-19 vaccine and some other related questions. And then I want to also thank Councilman Griffin for being here today to speak from a local politician standpoint, just to tell us about some of the infrastructures that are in place to provide support for our community members. And so with that being said, thank you to Ms. Henderson, our wraparound coordinator, for coordinating these efforts tonight. I also want to acknowledge our assistant principal, Ms. Morton, who's always ready to be here to be a support. And then thank you to all those who will be tuning in tonight. And so with no further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Henderson, who will give our introductions of our presenters for this evening. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Mr. Tidmore, and good evening, everyone. Thank you all for tuning in and being a part of our Harvey Rice CARES, the COVID-19 vaccine fact over fear. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Maier once we're done with our introductions. So tonight we are here this evening to try to answer some of your questions and concerns. We'll spend our time unpacking this very complex and ever-evolving situation of the pandemic. So I'm excited that we have experts from MetroHealth and the City of Cleveland to help us focus on sorting out the facts over fear. So these experts that we have with us this evening is Dr. Vanessa Maier, MD, MPH, and Dr. Sherrie Williams, MD, MHS, of MetroHealth Systems, and Councilman Griffin from the Ward 6. So Dr. Sherrie is the president, Dr. Williams is the past president of the medical staff for the MetroHealth System in Cleveland, Ohio. Dr. Williams is a board certified critical care specialist and an associate professor of the medicine of Case Western Reserve School of Medicine. She chairs MetroHealth Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee and the Medication Safety Subcommittee. As chair of the PST, she is the physician leader of the pharmacy responsible for safety and quality of medications being prescribed and dispensed. She oversees the policies and procedures that guide the clinical operations of the pharmacy. Dr. Vanessa Maier, MD and MPH, is a family physician, medical director of the MetroHealth School Health Program, and assistant professor of family medicine at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. In her role as medical director of the MetroHealth School Health Program, she has worked collaboratively to dramatically expand the capacity of the program. By focusing on population health initiatives, the MetroHealth School Health Program has increased completion of preventative health services, decreased emergency service utilization, and improved school attendance. Councilman Blain Griffin is the councilman of Ward 6 and represents one of Cleveland's most diverse wards, encompassing the east side neighborhoods of Fairfax, Larchmere, Little Italy, Wood Hill, and parts of Buckeye Center, University Circle, North Broadway, Slavic Village, and Union Mile. Councilman Griffin is the chairman of Council's Safety Committee and vice chair of Workforce and Community Benefits. He also sits on the committees of Development Planning and Sustainability, Finance, and Operations. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to Dr. Maier.
Thank you so much, Benita and Mr. Tidmore. Thank you so much for having us. I know Dr. Williams and I have had multiple conversations with our patients and with many in the community regarding this vaccine. And just so we're thrilled to be joining you tonight and going over some things in regard to the vaccination. I do have a slide deck that I'm going to share here in a minute, and I'm hoping I'm going to be able to get through that pretty quickly because it's always better when we can hear directly from you what your questions are. So let me go ahead and see if I can get up to speed with my technology. Oh, Benita, can you give me access to share my screen?
I just did.
Thank you. All right. All right, excellent. All right, okay. We're going to just dive right in here about these vaccines. And thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I'm so grateful that Dr. Williams is here today. She really has a wonderful perspective. She's been treating our patients on the front line in our ICUs at MetroHealth, and also chairs our medication safety committee and has a very strong understanding of the risks and benefits of this vaccination. So what are we talking about? Well, we have two vaccines that are authorized through the FDA for emergency use authorization. That includes the Pfizer vaccination and the Moderna vaccination. These are both mRNA vaccines. So they utilize mRNA to have your body generate the spike protein that then is presented to your immune system that allows you to launch that immune response. The mRNA does break down quickly, so it requires this lipid coat to protect it, and that is one of the challenges with this vaccine because it requires this interesting mechanism of storage. So the Pfizer vaccine requires this deep freeze storage. It is authorized for use in age 16 and above, and it has a 95% efficacy. So when we're talking vaccines, you know, influenza vaccination is usually 50 to 60% efficacious. So this is very dramatic efficacy that we're seeing in these vaccines. Moderna, similarly, 94% efficacy. Doesn't have to be as cold, but still has to be held at cold storage. Both these vaccines require 2 doses. The Pfizer vaccine can be dosed 3 weeks apart, and the Moderna vaccine is dosed 4 weeks apart. The Moderna vaccine is only approved to age 18 and above. So 16 is the youngest we can provide vaccination, and that's only for the Pfizer vaccine. As I said, these vaccinations are tremendously effective. So this is data on the Pfizer vaccination. That blue line are all the people out in the community who received the placebo dose of vaccine. That nice red line are all the people who received the vaccine. Now, important point, this is, you can see that after that first dose of vaccine, people did acquire the benefit of the vaccination. So right around the 2-week period, we see a significant reduction in COVID infections in those that received a vaccine. However, you know, so this has been some of the discussion that you may have heard in the news about, well, what can't we just go ahead and do 1-dose vaccine? We really don't know. We have the only data that we have is on the 2-dose vaccine. That's the efficacy data that we understand. Because the vast majority of people in these early trials had 2 doses of the vaccine. So we really have no data on people who only received 1 vaccination. All right, so diving right into the myths and facts of COVID vaccination, this has been a big concern for many of my patients. You know, they've heard early on that this is brand new technology, this mRNA technology. Maybe they should be a little bit concerned about that. The reality is we do have quite a significant history with this type of technology, and that was one of the things that allowed the scientists working in the initiative to try to bring us a vaccine to get us a vaccine so quickly. There's a lot of experience using mRNA technologies. These have been therapy technologies. So we've utilized mRNA vaccines, or similarly, these injectable therapies for cancer, utilizing that technique to sort of immunize cancer patients against cancer cells, allowing the immune system then to target those cancer cells. We also have some experience working in this. You may have heard of therapies for muscular dystrophy, as well as newer therapies for heart failure. So we also have similar mRNA vaccines. They're not used as widely because of those challenges with the cold storage. Okay, I've heard from a lot of patients, they're really worried about the mRNA vaccination changing their genomic structure. So we all understand mRNA is a part of like maybe the genome. It is challenging and complicated, and I certainly have been speaking with people in the medical community who also had similar concerns. The reality is that the mRNA does not enter the nucleus. It cannot alter your DNA. It cannot cause cancer. In fact, as we've said, many of these mRNA therapies are actually used to treat cancer, but often a concern that people have. Okay, this I get a lot. Well, I don't know, because this seemed like it was a very rushed process. And I will tell you, if you had told me, back at the beginning of COVID that we were going to have a highly effective, safe vaccination for this for this illness this fast, I would never have believed you. But because, as we talked about, there was such familiarity with this type of therapy and the mRNA therapies, because there were labs up and running this type of technology, people were poised to bring this into emergency use authorization. There was also $8 billion spent on the development of the vaccine. So there was huge financial buffers there. So, these companies were able to take some risks with generating vaccine early that they never would have been able to without those resources behind them. And then, unfortunately, one of the really big reasons why we were able to bring this vaccine so quickly to patients really is, unfortunately, because we're seeing such significant transmission of coronavirus within our communities. So in normal vaccine development, we we randomize people to get a vaccine or not to get a vaccine, and then we have to wait until people get the illness, and then see a difference between the people who got vaccinations and the people who didn't. And unfortunately, in this scenario, there was so much illness that people who did not have vaccination were getting illness at a very rapid rate. And so we were able to generate that data relatively quickly in comparison. A lot of my patient concerned, we have a very long history of racism within the medical community, and lots of hesitancy, understandably. Unfortunately, we have a strong history of not including disenfranchised communities in research. So, luckily, we're getting a little better at that. We're not quite where we should be, but we did see close to 9% African American enrollees in the clinical trials for this vaccine. And, it was wonderfully reassuring to see Dr. Corbett, her lab at the forefront of the Moderna vaccination development, and to see her at the helms of this this organization was very reassuring to see. Okay, so I've had a lot of questions from patients regarding allergies and allergic reactions to vaccination. Definitely lots of news coverage regarding anaphylaxis that we didn't see in the clinical trials, but then did see as the vaccination rolled out. And I'm sure Dr. Williams will have some insight for this. I know, we have seen many patients or many healthcare workers workers who've had prior history of anaphylaxis under normal circumstances would never consider vaccination, but given the risks that they recognize by treating patients with this very severe illness, they're sort of willing to take that risk. And so we are, as vaccine administrators, kind of trying to weigh the risks and benefits with people. The CDC declares anaphylaxis to a COVID vaccination or a component of the COVID vaccination as a contraindication to getting vaccinated. Very important. So if somebody truly has anaphylaxis to the vaccine, they should not be immunized. However, if they've had anaphylaxis, and we've certainly seen patients with severe anaphylaxis, nut allergies, egg allergies, anaphylaxis to food allergies, and then also, of course, just basic allergies to pets. Those patients do well with immunization. So again, only contraindications for vaccination would be anaphylaxis to a component of the vaccine. And remember, anaphylaxis is, you couldn't breathe and you needed to go directly to the emergency department to get an epinephrine injection to treat that. So a local reaction would not, so sort of swelling or inflammation at the site of immunization would not be considered anaphylaxis and not a contraindication to getting vaccination. So this is sort of one of those procedural things that we do when we're providing immunizations for people. And then as you can see, allergies to any type of medication, allergies to foods or pets would not be a contraindication to getting immunizations. If you've had an anaphylaxis to a food or a prior history of anaphylaxis, run to the emergency department because you can't breathe, requiring epinephrine. We do recommend that you receive that vaccination in a place like MetroHealth that's prepared and can watch over you for 30 minutes after you've received your vaccination. Okay, so I get a lot of questions from patients about underlying chronic conditions that might interfere with their ability to get vaccinations. And certainly early on, I had a lot of patients that I did need to check in with their rheumatologist or with their specialists regarding their risk-benefit ratio for vaccinations. So we're going to talk a little bit about a few of these, particular people who are immunocompromised, people who are pregnant, people who are lactating. So people who are immunocompromised, when we look at the data for who was enrolled in the trials, this is important, right? Because people don't want to enroll people who are immunocompromised in these trials. They want to be able to establish efficacy for their vaccinations. And so we really have very few immunocompromised patients enrolled in these trials. These vaccines are safe for immunocompromised patients, but we do not understand the efficacy. It's very likely that if you are immunocompromised, you're going to have a hard time launching a response to the vaccination. And so people who are immunocompromised really should have a conversation with their physician regarding how to proceed in their life after vaccination, because it's possible that they may not have the same 95% efficacy from this vaccine after they've been vaccinated. Autoimmune disorders. So we know people with certain autoimmune disorders can have reactions after vaccines. We've seen that in Guillain-Barré syndrome, certain Bell's palsy. There are vaccinations people who with autoimmune disorders should not receive due to an immune response to the vaccination that may have a systemic response. We have not seen that with COVID vaccination, but I have certainly had patients with autoimmune disorders that I have had to check in with their specialist to ensure that there are no contraindications for this vaccination. And I'll tell you, the universal response from the rheumatologist has been, please ensure that you get vaccination. But for those who do have autoimmune disorders, it is really important to understand and to have a conversation with your rheumatologist regarding your risk and benefit of vaccinations. We do wonder if there may be reduced efficacy in this group as well. So something important to consider. All right, what about pregnant patients? I've had lots of conversations over the past few weeks about pregnancy as we launch this out with our teachers in particular, and what the risk and benefit ratio is for healthy women who are pregnant in terms of immunization. So for the patients that I've had a chance to have a conversation with their obstetricians regarding their pregnancy, the universal response from our obstetricians has been, please have patients get immunized. There does appear to be an increased risk for both the mother and the child of COVID infection during pregnancy. This is an area where I do recommend people have a conversation with their obstetrician. So I'll just share, there are some patients who have very significant medical illnesses along with their pregnancy. So patients with diabetes who are also pregnant, they have other reasons to have a very severe outcome from a COVID infection. And those patients have been counseled to please go ahead and get immunized. Also for lactating patients, we do not anticipate that this vaccine will have any complications for a breastfeeding infant, but data is limited. Now, I will say that we do have some ongoing studies of women who've enrolled in our COVID vaccination trials, as well as some children in our COVID vaccination trials. So more data to come. I feel like I say that quite frequently as in regards to COVID. More data to come. Important things to consider. I do have patients who get cosmetic fillers and Botox, and those patients should be warned. They may have some swelling in their dermal fillers after their vaccination. So that's important to be aware of. And I have had patients who get Botox and have delayed their Botox therapies around vaccination due to that side effect. Okay, this I get a lot because patients are coming in for their primary care, and it could be, a teacher who's up for their shingles vaccination, but any day now they could be getting their COVID vaccination. And I've said, hold up on any vaccines. If you are in line to get your COVID vaccination, you're going to want to get your COVID vaccination first. We can give you your shingles vaccine 2 weeks later. So anyway, recommendations from the CDC are to space vaccinations 2 weeks apart. So just keep that in mind. Okay, this I've gotten a lot. Okay, if I get my Pfizer first dose, can I get Moderna second dose? What's going on? Are you sure you're going to have the vaccination for me for my second dose? So CDC recommendations are that you get the same dose. There's no data on interchangeability. There's no data on people who got Moderna first, Pfizer second, Pfizer first, Moderna second. So please remember the dose that you got, write it down, keep your card, and ensure that you get the same vaccine. And that's really important for, ensuring that you get the best efficacy after your vaccination. Okay, this is really important. So I've heard this vaccine makes people sick. And, we certainly have seen these cases where people come in for their vaccination. Unfortunately, they'd been exposed to COVID prior to their vaccine, and then they get sick with COVID after their vaccine. And of course, that's not from the vaccination. They were exposed to the illness before they got their vaccine. So the vaccine cannot give you COVID. However, the vaccine does have high rates of what we call reactogenicity. So reactogenicity, we really understand as your own immune system launching a response. It's a great thing. I remember talking with people who were in the early COVID trials, and they had no symptoms after their vaccine. And they said, man, I can't wait to get unblinded and get my real vaccine because they were concerned they didn't have a reactogenicity response. So when we talk about reactogenicity, this is very common in both the Pfizer and the Moderna, mostly after the second dose, but people get tender at the site. People can have systemic symptoms, low-grade fever, muscle aches, joint aches. And this was absolutely something that I personally had after my second vaccination. So people should really be aware. It's nothing wrong. It's the vaccine doing its job. And we do think that that's why these vaccines are so efficacious. You're really sensing that the vaccine is doing its job. All right, so in Ohio, we're still supply limited, phase one. We're hoping, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the newer vaccines that are coming down the pipeline, and we're hoping, really, really hoping that we're going to be able to move into phase two, and then of course, phase 3 and 4, where we're going to be able to vaccinate everyone. And this is so important as we think about really controlling this illness, getting back to our lives. So ramping up the availability of vaccine is really something that we're focused on. All right, so we're phase 1B is in full effect, and I know, we've been plowing ahead here at Metro. My patients have been, getting their MyChart, links to go schedule their vaccination, and I'm just really grateful for how it's been rolling out here at Metro. And we can talk a little bit about what I know in terms of the school rollout, and also Mr. Griffin, I'm sure, will touch on that as well. All right. I did want to tell you a little bit about some of the other vaccines that are coming, and we're hoping that as these get on board, we're going to open up and have much more, be able to move faster through those vaccine phases. So we do have the Johnson & Johnson vaccination. We are all waiting in anticipation and believe that there will be an emergency use authorization, either maybe even by the end of this week. I don't know, maybe early next week. This vaccine is 66% effective. I know there's been a lot of conversation like, wow, well, there was compared to the 94, 95% effective. I don't know if I want that one. Well, I'm telling patients, please get the vaccine that you can get, because even if it's only 66% effective against infection, there's actually really high efficacy against severe illness and hospitalizations, and that's really important. And then, of course, we have the Oxford Astrazeneca vaccination. It was sort of held up a little bit with emergency use authorization. There was some questions about its efficacy data, and we can go a little bit into that. But we do anticipate that AstraZeneca vaccine will be online soon. Great news about both of those is it's a single dose vaccination. Both are modified adenovirus DNA vaccines. And then we have the Novavax vaccination. Good early efficacy data, 89% effective. That's a protein adjuvant vaccination. Many of us are very comfortable with protein adjuvant vaccinations, sort of very similar to many of the vaccines that we give in primary care, and that's a single dose vaccine too. So as these more single dose vaccines come online, we really do anticipate that much more vaccine will be available. I have had a lot of questions about variants and whether or not vaccines are going to still be efficacious against these newer variants. So everybody, may have heard we've got 3 variants that we're really kind of keeping an eye on: the UK variant, the Brazilian variant, the South African variant. We actually have our own Ohio variant. I don't know if anybody's heard about that. The good news is the majority of these variants do not have a significant mutation that affects the spike protein, and that is the target for all of our vaccinations. So we're really watching this closely. We're very concerned about a certain mutation that does appear to affect the morphology of the spike protein. We do unfortunately anticipate that this may be a problem. And we know that the more vaccine is out there, the more opportunity it has to replicate and develop a mutation that could potentially alter the spike protein. And then we would be very concerned about the ability of these vaccines to provide protection. So the sooner we stop this virus, the better, and the more effective these vaccines will be. So really getting these vaccines out will be so critically important. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and open it up for questions. And then, Dr. Williams, is there anything that you want to add to that or comment on?
Sorry, I had to find the unmute button. I want to first start off by thanking you for a great presentation, going over a lot of the sort of hot button issues and topics. And I really appreciate and thank our hosts so much for having me here. Dr. Maier invited me. And so thank you, Vanessa, for inviting me. One of the things that I know sometimes happens for us in the medical field is sometimes we talk a lot of medical jargon, and sometimes people have questions about medical jargon. One of the things that I found that I was doing all the time is I was saying mRNA, and people always said, so what is mRNA? And so one of the things that I think is helpful in sort of understanding how the vaccine works is, in the name mRNA is messenger, and so you're sort of sending a message to the body that here's something to be on the lookout for. And so with these vaccines, they sort of prime the immune system, right? So the immune system is on the lookout from this message that it's gotten, that something you could come in contact with, you should be on the lookout for. And if you see it, you want to have an immune response where you go on the attack. So I always tell my patients that, the immune system is sort of like the policeman of the body. They're sort of going through the body and policing what should and shouldn't be there, what's dangerous to the body or harmful to the body. And that can be infections or bacteria or viruses or cancers. And so the body recognizes these things as not being good for it and will make antibodies, which are proteins against these things. So the mRNA is giving a signal or a message, sending a message to the immune system. Be on the lookout for this. And so this vaccine, both the Pfizer and the Moderna, use that type of technology. And as Dr. Maier has said, that technology existed even before this pandemic. And that was good for us because it allowed us to move along quickly in terms of making the vaccine, but it's also good for us because that same technology works very nicely if we have to give an additional booster shot for any of these variants in the future. It makes it easy to tweak the message just a little bit to be able to tell the body to be on the lookout for any of these variants. So I think although the science is perhaps a little tricky to understand, it really and truly has led to a safe vaccine. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes makes our patients nervous in terms of the science and how quickly it seems as though it came about. So I don't know if there are any other questions.
I think we've actually prepared some today so that we can kind of continue to ask some of those questions that are common amongst our audience. So Ms. Henderson, if you could at this time, maybe cue those questions up.
Okay, so some of the questions that I had that we had put together, some of those things you had answered within the presentation. One of the things that I would like to know a little more about is since we're talking about the mutation and the variants, and so I'm really concerned about if we take the vaccine and this mutant does not, the vaccine doesn't work against the mutation, how soon do we need to get that next booster? And is it going to be the booster that we already have in place? So is that still, are we going to go back and get like a third dose of the 2 vaccines that we already have?
An excellent question. And the answer, unfortunately, probably is not as satisfactory as I would like it to be, in large part because the answer is we're still studying that. I think there's one really important point that I'd like to make, and that is what we know thus far is both the Pfizer and Moderna are effective for the 2 common variants that we have seen. Certainly the UK variant and the Brazil variant, the Pfizer and Moderna work well against those. These variants are highly contagious, and many times people are like, well, is it more deadly? And I always say to people, even though the variants may not be more deadly, the fact that they're more contagious means that they affect more people, and more people get sick from it. And so you end up with more people being hospitalized and more people dying just by virtue of the fact that it's more contagious and more people are getting sick. So what these vaccines do is they prevent people from getting really sick. They prevent hospitalization and severe sickness from the coronavirus. And the 2 vaccines that we have work well for Brazil and for UK variants. Now, the South African variant, what we are now beginning to see is they may not work as well. That's not to say they don't work at all, as well. And so what we are following closely, and the scientists that follow this, epidemiologists and researchers that follow this, are following how much the South African variant is in our community. And what we know is that as a virus spreads, in order for something to mutate or develop a variant, it has to replicate. And the way it replicates is every time it goes from person to person, it gets a new twist or another little spin on it. The virus learns every time it infects somebody how it has to change itself to be more hardy or robust. So it learns each time it goes from person to person. So the way to prevent variants and the way to keep ourselves from having more of, let's say, the South African variant is to cut down on transmission or spreading, because that's what leads to the virus getting the capability to be resistant to things. So we're in good shape with these two vaccines. What we know is we have to hurry along in terms of getting people vaccinated, because it's going to cut down on transmission, and cutting down on transmission from person to person will cut down on these mutants showing up.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there another question that you had, or have all of them been answered?
I have one.
Okay, Mr. C.A.R.E.
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. My question is, does a positive corona test, does that offer immunity to the virus? So if you happen to contract the virus and you make it through that, does your body recognize that the fight that it just endured, if that fight were to happen, like say maybe like 30 days later, the same patient came back into contact with the virus again?
So that's a great question. And it's a question that I'm sure Dr. Maier has gotten a lot. I know I have. And the answer is two parts. The first is yes, when you get coronavirus and you get past the acute illness, you will make antibodies. That is true. The problem with the antibodies that you make is a couple of things. Number one, we don't know how strong those antibodies are at resisting future infections. And what we now are seeing is that the antibodies that you make to the original coronavirus may actually not protect you against any of these mutants or variant coronavirus. In fact, we know for a fact that it doesn't, because we have seen patients have the original coronavirus and then get infected with one of the mutants. So the first thing is you'll make antibodies, but we don't know how strong they are. The second thing we know is that they may not work. In fact, we're fairly certain that they don't work as well against the mutants. And then the third thing is the antibodies may not last very long. And we have done tests on people where they have antibodies and then 6 months or 10 months later, the antibodies are gone. So the strength of the antibodies, how long the antibodies last, and how effective they are against variants is all stuff that doesn't do well. And so this is one of the reasons why, even if you have had coronavirus, we still recommend that you get vaccinated. Even if you've had it, we still recommend you get vaccinated. And I'll say one other thing, and then I'll let Dr. Maier jump in. This is one of the reasons why we say also that even after you've been vaccinated, even after you've had coronavirus, you still need to wear a mask and social distance and wash your hands and do all of the things that you were doing even before you got vaccinated, because number one, there are variants out here that are becoming more and more contagious. Number two, the vaccine protects the person who got vaccinated against severe disease. We know that people can be carriers of the virus and not have severe disease. And the transmission of that person who's a carrier after vaccination is very low, but it's not zero. And so we still want people to wear masks for all of those reasons.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll just say, that was exactly what I would say, what Dr. Williams said, and it is very, very unfortunate that we do see, those infections in people who've already had this disease, and so many more unanswered questions. But unfortunately, we aren't seeing that kind of sustained immunity after natural infection that we wish we would.
So can I ask one question? Because I think we have maybe one or two staff members here with us tonight. And I know whether they've expressed it openly that many of our staff members, our teachers who are kind of the suggested next group, right, have concerns and anxieties about taking the shot. What can you tell them, or to those who will come back and watch this, from a professional standpoint to help them ease some anxieties that they may have about this vaccine?
I mean, I'll just share really quickly, that is absolutely normal. So, I mean, I will share, I had a lot of vaccine hesitancy regarding this vaccine, right? I mean, I had to go and really look through all the data for myself. And, I would say, I think there's this wonderful analogy that, vaccine hesitancy is this very human, very normal, very healthy reaction. I had a patient who was working in the nursing home and, came to me and said, Dr. Maier, they showed up, where I work, and they had my vaccine for them, for me. They said, hey, I got your vaccine. Here you go. And I said, no. And I said, good for you. Did anybody have a conversation with you? Did anybody explain this vaccine to you? And he said no. So I told him no. And I said, good for you. I don't want any of my patients putting anything in their bodies that they don't understand. And even those patients of mine who understand, who know the science, I love the analogy of like a fear of heights and, walking across a bridge. The bridge is going to hold you. All that science that the bridge, is perfectly engineered to carry you across this space. But if you're afraid of heights, you're afraid of heights. You still are you're still going to be worried, anxious, wondering, it's, so there are these normal human emotions around this vaccination. And I've been telling people, listen, this is normal. If you weren't scared about something like this, I'd be a little worried about you. That is a normal reaction, to have that hesitancy, that fear of the unknown. So I'm just really so thankful for all my patients who said, Dr. Ma, I'm scared, but I know it's the right thing to do. And I know it's going to be, crossing this bridge, even as scared as I am, is going to be the closest path to getting back to my life, to being able to hug my loved ones, to taking care of everybody in my community. And so I am scared, but I trust, I trust that this bridge is going to hold me. I trust that science has done its job here. I'm trusting you, and I'm going to walk across that bridge. And I really, that really resonates with me. And I think that's really important, to validate people's concerns, because, this is new, and there should be some, self-protective hesitancy regarding this.
I appreciate your analogy, as well as the transparency about anxiety being a very normal function. And I'm glad that our listeners will be able to hear that, and they don't feel as if they're isolated on an island by themselves, because oftentimes it's kind of living in that scene of a black and white world where it's either this or this, and there's no gray. And there's absolutely, when you're talking about something new in a new space, that there's always going to be some areas of gray. I have one more question for you, and then I want to make time for Councilman Griffin to maybe speak to us about some of the infrastructures that they have in place to help support this effort, because we realize it'll be, very important for our community members also to be able to have access to take this vaccine, and some of the steps that are in place. But one question that I do have, and this is one of those things that we need like a myth buster for. There's this thought around, because you got a lot of stuff, right? So we're in the new informational age, right? And the pandemic has been, what I like to say, a blessing and can be a disadvantage at the same time, right? So you have folks that are getting on saying, okay, this is a conspiracy theory, this is a trick. If you put this in you, the 5G, they're gonna hit a tower. And I just wanna speak the language that we say jokingly, but people take to heart. But there's this concern about long-term effects, right? So once you get the vaccine and it's going to be in there doing something or causing you, some other problems, Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, so a couple things. Certainly, we know that there's a lot of information out there in the community, on the internet, Facebook, all sorts of, social media platforms. One of the things that I always encourage, my patients to do is, first of all, besides the message, consider the source. Who is the messenger? Okay, who's the messenger? And so, there's a difference between seeing someone like Kizzy Corbett, giving a message, or Dr. Maier giving a message, as compared to, my cousin's sister's friend who works at the hospital, right? Okay, so she works at the hospital. I don't take anything away from her, but that's not the same as Kizzy Corbett, right? And so I would always say we need to not only look at the message, but consider the source and who's the messenger. So that's the first thing. It is true that none of us have a crystal ball to see what will happen in the future 100% of the time. None of us do, about anything, not just this vaccine, but about anything. And so when people talk about long-term side effects, the long-term side effects of COVID are very real. So people are concerned about long-term side effects about the vaccine, which I cannot sit here and swear to you that 10 years from now, there won't be something that comes up. I can't swear that to you, no. But what I can tell you is that scientifically, there's no basis for that ever happening. Scientifically, there's no basis for that happening, just by virtue of the way that the vaccine works. There's no scientific evidence or basis for that to be the case. On the flip side, though, what we do know is COVID has long-term side effects, and we see that. COVID causes people to sometimes not get their sense of smell and taste back. COVID causes people, when they survive it and they get off the breathing machine and they get home, to still sometimes require oxygen and be short of breath, be fatigued, and can hardly move from the bedroom to the bathroom. COVID causes people to have fatigue. Many people who survive it have lasting psychosocial, emotional, almost like a PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and anxiety behind it. So COVID, even if you survive it, is not always a benign thing where life goes back to as usual. There are many people that have long-term side effects, so much so that many institutions are starting clinics and resources for people who are what we call long haulers, meaning they have symptoms for the long haul, because we're now recognizing that there are things about it. So there's no scientific evidence to expect that there is any long-lasting side effect. And what I would say is, remember, as Dr. Maier pointed out, the technology is a technology that has been used in other therapeutic medications. And those medications have actually been out on the market treating other diseases, and we've not seen any long-lasting effects. We've not seen any long-lasting effects from any vaccines that we all got as children growing up. And the same scientists and the same researchers that study and develop those therapeutics with that same technology that develop vaccines that we all got as a kid are the same people doing this. And we've not seen long-term side effects. All of us had vaccinations as children, and here we are, right? So there's no evidence for it. And while we could all, sort of hypothesize and wonder, what might happen, maybe, possibly, in the future, 10 years from now. The reality is there's no evidence for that and no proof that is even, likely. There's a difference between what is possible versus what is likely. Is it possible that a bomb could drop on us tonight? Yes, because there are plenty of bombs in the world. That's possible. But is it likely to happen tonight? Not likely.
I appreciate that. You really lifted something. Mr. Carey, if you could mute your mic there, but what I'm grateful for is how you kind of drew us into the idea of possible and likely. And I think sometimes we may allow ourselves to live in those hyperboles or hypotheses, right? That area of what could potentially happen, but I like how you said that the science doesn't support that. And I know there's nothing 100%, but I appreciate you speaking to that, because what I am not necessarily afraid of, but is that we hear all of this other information coming and people will start doing home remedies, right? The things that are coming out now saying, no, you don't need that, do this instead. And it may cause more harm to us as, as a population than any help. But kind of transitioning, thank you so much, both of you, Dr. Williams, Dr. Maier, for speaking to the knowledge side of this conversation. And now I would like to hear from Mr. Griffin, if we could, Councilman Griffin, just to talk to us about maybe some efforts already underway to help provide some support for the COVID-19 vaccine. Councilman Griffin?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Tidmore, and thank you everybody else. And wow, I will keep my comments brief because I just got an earful and really it was like watching the Science Channel with these two doctors and learning so much from you. So thank you so much. And sometimes it's best to be a good listener instead of a talker. But just want to give you a couple of updates and just so that you can be aware of the city's efforts. And I'll start off with right now, just giving you the numbers in the city. The city has approximately 23,731 people that have been identified with COVID-19. And of those, we know that 43% have been African American, 24% have been white, and trying to get back to the others. The others, just lost my screen for a minute. But basically, the point that I'm trying to get to is that, as you can see in our communities, which is predominantly African American, the COVID-19 has really affected us big time. And we know that because of past experiments like the Henrietta Lacks experiment, where a lot of her cells were used at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore for experiments to cure cancer, and she was never notified. It created a lot of distrust. We know the Tuskegee Institute study where a lot of African-American men were tested upon or were received tests for syphilis and were not notified. It created a lot of anxiety. But here we are today, which is the reason I wanted to give you that number, where African-Americans are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And the same thing is a lot of anxiety around the vaccination. So thank you to all the doctors for really illuminating this. And I'm glad that you talked about Ms. Corbett, because a lot of people don't know, as we celebrate on the dawn of Black History Month, a lot of people didn't know is that an African-American woman was the lead scientist on the Moderna vaccination. So that speaks kudos, and that shows how diversity is incredible as we deal with this. The city of Cleveland is kind of at the state's mercy when it comes to COVID-19 vaccinations. And let me just disclose this, my own personal business, if I could. This year was my first year even getting the flu shot. I know that a lot of people are saying, wow, Councilman, you're 49 years old and you just now got a flu shot. Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I had a lot of the mistrust that a lot of other people had. And even in the simple flu shot, I would not get a flu shot until this year, when I made up my mind that as a community leader, I think it's important that if I'm going to talk the talk, it's time for me to walk the walk and make sure that I also get the needle in my arm, that I also get the COVID-19 testing and everything else. So I am coming into the dawn of awakening of my of awakening with science as well. So just like everybody else, just to give you that heads up. We at the City of Cleveland are in phase 1B of the state's protocol for COVID-19 vaccinations. As you are aware, the first 1A was first responders and healthcare workers. So people that work in the hospitals and police, fire, EMS, as well as a lot of the frontline people that were doing it. They were the first ones. Then we moved to vulnerable populations, which was 80 years old and older, and about 14% of Cleveland's population is 80 years and older. So we got a lot of those folks vaccinated. Unfortunately, a lot of the firefighters and EMS and police department, only 60% of those folks took the vaccine because a lot of them are in a wait and see phase. But now it's my understanding that now that the vaccine has started to roll out and they have seen that people are really accommodating the vaccines well, that they're starting to take them more as well. But now we're in 1B, which is anybody 70 years, and correct me if I'm wrong, to the doctors, 70 years and older, which includes people like my mother, who I've been encouraging to get the vaccines. It's said that we want to get to be about 84% or more. And I don't know if the doctors mentioned that. I know I had to step away for a minute to get the herd mentality. So the whole goal in Cleveland is, how do we get to herd mentality and really try to roll this out? For information on where you can get a COVID-19 vaccination, you need to go to 211, which is the first call for help. That actually look at locations of where you can get COVID-19 vaccinations. I know this week now here's where the challenge, and excuse me if I confuse anyone. The challenge has been is that we only get a limited amount of vaccines. So for example, if the city only gets 2,000, our original batch was about 6,000 vaccines, but now we've rolled them over into dealing with the 1B population. If the city, once the vaccine is out, and the city unthaws those vaccines, they have to be used, which means that, what happens is if someone makes appointments and then they don't show up, then we have to actually scramble to try to find more people in that category in order to get the vaccinations. So I really tell people, if you do register to get the vaccine, please show up, because the last thing we want to do is to have any vaccines go to waste. We've been very diligent as a city to not let any vaccines go to waste. The location, if you have a senior or if you have a person over 70 years old, they can go to the City of Cleveland website and the health department website, or they can go to 211 and they can try to register for Zelma George. Zelma George is the closest location this Saturday where someone can get the vaccination. But remember, they have to be 70 years of age and older, and you do have to register so that we can make sure that we have those vaccines available. This is a complex rollout. Nationwide, statewide, is very complex, and I think that people are learning as we go. But the City of Cleveland is committed to continue to adjust. One of the things that we wanted to do is to have one place. That's why I keep mentioning 211, because originally you had several different sites that people were going to try to figure out where they can go get a vaccination, because vaccinations are given out at your doctor's office. They're given out at CVS, Walgreens locations. They're given out at FQHCs, federally qualified health centers, like C.A.R.E Alliance, Neon Health, and other type of health centers like McCafferty on the west side and J. Glenn Smith on the east side. But then they're also given out by local health departments. The city, if you're in the city of Cleveland, and then if you're in the suburbs of the Cleveland, then it's the Cuyahoga County Health Department. So I would urge everyone, once again, to go to 211 to look at when your category is up in order to get the vaccination. I'm not a frontline worker, I'm not in the category, so I'm on a standby, wait and see. But I will tell you, after this week, as Principal Tidmore did allude to, is that the city of Cleveland, the Cleveland School District, are now in line to receive the vaccination. So a lot of the school district folks will now be in line to get vaccinations. I will say that I was watching a show yesterday with Randy Weingartner, who's the head of the American Federation of Teachers, which is the umbrella organization of the Cleveland Teachers Union and all of the unions across the United States. And I know that Chicago is on the verge of going on strike because a lot of their teachers are resistant to being forced to take the vaccine, because you do have the option on whether or not you want to take it. But what Randy Weingartner said, which stuck out to me, is that Cleveland is really the model, as we're talking to a group of educators and healthcare officials, of how the teachers and the administrators believe that Cleveland is a great model of how their school district and how their school system is rolling out the vaccine and how they're working with a hybrid system. So I commend CEO Eric Gordon for really putting forth what I think is a well thought out plan for the school district to really deal with this. Other than that, all I could say, this is a very difficult topic to talk about, and you clearly had the experts. You didn't need me to ramble on about this, but I will tell you that my office and the city of Cleveland is always here to help you guys with this vaccine, and really encourage the community to really take these vaccines. And like I said, I'm having my awakening with science too. And I'm going to lead by example, and I encourage everybody on this call to lead by example too. Thank you, Principal Tidmore, and thank you, Ms. Henderson, and all of you guys for the work that you're doing to, educate our community and really talk to our parents about the importance of this vaccine.
Thank you so much, Councilman Griffin, for joining us tonight. And if we can, I know we've got some folks with us tonight. If you don't mind, just go ahead and show your screen. And let's give a warm thank you to our presenters today. I've got some Harvey Rice staff on here. We like to raise the roof. So can we raise the roof for our presenters tonight? And let's give them a virtual hand for a job well done. Thank you so much for this time that you spent with us today. I'm sure that there are more questions that we could probably ask, but I think tonight was well spent. And so at this time, I'm gonna go ahead and ask Ms. Henderson if she could go ahead and end our recording, but do know that this will be available. So we're asking for you to push this out to the residents, let them know that this information is available. Councilman Griffin, if you wanna lead them to our website and let them know. We had some of Cleveland's finest and one of the major health systems or health organizations in the city of Cleveland here to provide us some factual information. And we want to make sure that we get this out to as many of our community members as possible. Thank you for letting us know about 211, the one-stop shop for answers and questions, because I'm sure that even after getting the wealth of information we received tonight, that we'll have questions tomorrow, right? Or as we start to absorb more and allow for it to resonate, there'll be other questions that we'll have. But again, we just want to say thank you so much. Thank you to our viewers that are present with us today, tonight for this very important informational. And we are looking